The High Elder had been speaking for 11 minutes. Kaelor Blackmere, Alpha King of Valdoria, ruler of all 7 packs, sovereign of the Iron Throne of Moonstone, had not heard a single word. He stood on the ceremony dais the way he stood in every public room. Perfectly still, perfectly controlled, carved from shadow and silver, while the court arranged itself around him like river water parting for a stone. His jaw was set. His amber gold eyes were fixed on the middle distance. His hands were clasped behind his back with a precision that had nothing to do with decorum and everything to do with the fact that if he unclenched them, someone in this hall might notice they were trembling. He had been trembling for 4 months. He had not slept properly in 4 months. His wolf had not gone quiet in 4 months, not once, not for an hour, not even in the middle of the night when there was nothing to react to and no audience to perform control for. It paced and it growled and it pressed its massive dark nose against the inside of his chest and whined, low and devastating, in the way wolves did when they had lost something they could not name. He had lost something he could not name. That was the part he couldn't explain to Brennan, to the council, to the High Elder, who was still speaking. Something about the Autumn Accord and the trade alliances and the symbolic importance of this public renewal ceremony for the unity of the 7 packs. He could not explain that he had not lost a political asset or a strategic alliance or even a woman. He had lost a scent. Rain on stone. Something green, something warm underneath it, like wood smoke and old paper, and a sweetness he had no word for, a sweetness that had only existed for 8 seconds before it was gone. 8 seconds. He had been standing in the council antechamber 4 months ago, reviewing border dispatches, when she had walked past the open door. Not into the room, not stopping, just passing in the corridor. A servant girl in a gray dress carrying a stack of linen, not looking at anyone, moving the way people moved when they had learned to be invisible. And in the 8 seconds it took her to cross the doorway, the entire architecture of his internal world had rearranged itself around her. His wolf had gone absolutely silent. And then she was gone, and his wolf had started screaming and had not stopped since. He had turned the palace inside out, looking for her. Quietly at first, methodically, the way he did everything. Sending Brennan to cross-reference servant rosters, checking the morning linen assignments, walking the corridors himself at midnight under the pretense of reviewing security routes. He had found nothing, no record of her, no servant matching that description. The gray dress could have belonged to a dozen girls. None of them smelled right when he checked. He had stood in the laundry corridor at 2 a.m, pressing linen to his face like a man losing his mind. And Brennan had found him there. And Brennan had said nothing, which was one of the many reasons Brennan had held the position of First Beta for 11 years. That was 3 months ago. Now it was the Autumn Accord renewal. The great hall of the palace was full. 500 wolves, council members, pack alphas, noble houses in their ceremony colors, the High Elder at the lectern, the ceremonial banners of all 7 packs hanging from the vaulted ceiling. Kaelor stood on the dais and breathed through his mouth and tried to listen to the High Elder and tried to stop his wolf from going feral in the middle of a formal political ceremony, and something tugged at his sleeve. He looked down. A child looked up. She was small, 4 years old, perhaps 5, with a round, serious face and eyes that didn't match. One brown, one green. The way eyes sometimes came in old bloodlines. Her dark hair was escaping a braid that someone had attempted with more love than skill. She was wearing a dress that was too big for her, deep blue, pinned at the shoulder. She was holding a small handful of moonflowers that were already wilting from the grip of her fist. She was looking up at him with no fear whatsoever. "Excuse me?" she said. Kaylor stared at her. No one spoke to him like that in a ceremony. No one spoke to him like that at all, usually. His first beta had to clear his throat to get his attention. Council members sent formal letters requesting audiences. This child had simply reached up and grabbed his sleeve and said, "Excuse me?" as if he were a moderately interesting person who happened to be standing in her way. "Why is that lady crying?" she said. He looked where she was pointing, across the hall, near the back, in the crowd of visiting servants and lower-ranked attendants who always stood at the edge of these functions, present but peripheral, part of the ceremony in the way furniture was part of the ceremony. She was half hidden behind a column. Not intentionally hidden, he realized, just standing where there was space. A woman in a gray dress. Dark hair pinned simply at her nape, still as stone, and her face was wet. She was not sobbing. She was not making any sound at all. But there were tears moving steadily down her face, the way water moved down a window. Quietly, relentlessly, as if they had been falling for a long time, and she had stopped noticing them. The scent hit him like a physical blow. Rain on stone, something green, wood smoke and old paper, and that sweetness, that specific sweetness he had spent 4 months trying to describe to himself, and failed every time, now so close and so overwhelming that the room actually tilted. His wolf went from a trembling whine to absolute detonating silence. Then it lunged. He grabbed the balustrade with one hand and held on. "She smells like your wolf," the child said helpfully, looking up at him with her mismatched eyes. "The same as you, but sadder." The High Elder had stopped speaking. Kaylor was not sure when that had happened. He was aware, distantly, that everyone on the dais was looking at him, and everyone in the immediate vicinity was looking at him, and the child was still looking at him with complete unself-conscious directness, waiting for an answer to her question, because she had asked a reasonable question, and it was rude not to answer. "Who are you?" Kaylor said. "Neva," said the child. "My mama brought me to see the ceremony. She said the palace has real gold on the walls, and she was right, look." She pointed at the filigree. "But then Mama went to help with the serving, and I got bored, so I came to look at the wolves, and then I saw you, and then I smelled it." She tilted her head. "Why is the lady crying?" Kaylor looked at the woman behind the column. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the floor, her hands clasped in front of her, her face tipped slightly down. The tears were still falling. Her shoulders were very still, very deliberate, the stillness of someone maintaining control through enormous effort. "I don't know," Kaylor said. "You should ask her," Neva said. He looked down at her again. "You should ask her," Neva repeated, with the absolute serene authority of a small child who has not yet learned that adults rarely do the obvious thing. "Mama says when someone is crying, you should ask them why, because sometimes they just need someone to notice." Kaylor looked at his first beta. Brennan's face was doing the thing where it showed nothing, but his eyes were doing the other thing, the thing where they said, with some urgency, that this child was correct and he should do exactly what she said. Kaylor stepped off the dais. The hall went silent in a different way than it had been silent before. The High Elder stopped mid-sentence for the second time. The council members turned. 500 wolves watched their Alpha King descend from the ceremony dais and walk across the great hall toward a woman in a gray dress who was standing half behind a column at the back. And the room held its breath with the particular frozen quality of people watching something happen that they do not yet have language for. She saw him coming when he was 10 feet away. Her head came up. Her eyes found him. Dark eyes, the color of deep water. And in them, he watched something happen that was not quite fear and not quite grief and not quite longing, but contained all three, layered, like stones at the bottom of a river. Her breath caught. The tears stopped, not because they had finished, but because the rest of her had simply ceased. She did not run. That surprised him later. She had clearly been debating it. He could see the calculation in the set of her jaw, the quick glance toward the nearer door, the assessment of distance and obstacles. And then she had decided against it, or her legs had decided against it, or something had decided against it that was not quite her, and she had stayed very still with her back against the column and watched him close the remaining 10 feet. He stopped 2 feet from her. Up close she was. He registered details he hadn't been able to absorb from across the room. She was thin in the way that spoke of long habits rather than recent shortage, the kind of thin that had been built over years of not having quite enough. Her gray dress was clean and carefully mended. Her hands, still clasped in front of her, had calluses at the fingertips. Her eyes were red from crying, and her jaw was working with the effort of not crying any further, and she smelled like rain on stone and wood smoke and that sweetness. Closer now, close enough that he felt his wolf go very, very still, in a way it had not been still in 4 months. "You were in the corridor," he said. Her throat moved. "Yes. 4 months ago. Yes. I've been looking for you." Something moved through her face, complicated, layered, painful. She looked away from him. "I know," she said very quietly. "I'm sorry. I left because—" She stopped, started again. "I wasn't supposed to be there. I don't serve in the palace. I was visiting. And then I walked past that door and I—" Another stop. Her jaw tightened. "I ran. I know I shouldn't have, but I ran." "Why?" Her eyes came back to his. And there was something in them now, sharp and bright and furious underneath the grief, something that wanted to say something he suspected she had been arguing with herself about saying for 4 months. "Because I know what this is," she said, "and I know what it means for someone like me, and I know what it costs." Her voice was very steady. "I know what it costs the people who don't have any power in it." Kaylor was quiet. "Your name," he said. "Mira. Mira." He used it the way he used everything that mattered, with precision, like a key in a lock, like a word he had been waiting for without knowing he was waiting. "Why were you crying?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Because I'd almost stopped," she said. "Almost convinced myself that if I never came back here, eventually it would stop hurting. And then my employer sent me to the ceremony because they needed an extra pair of hands, and I walked into this hall, and I could hear the ceremony, and I could—" Her voice fractured, just slightly, just at the edges. She steadied it. "I could hear your voice giving the welcome address, and it just—" She stopped. The hall was extraordinarily quiet. Kaylor was aware of 500 wolves listening to this conversation, and found that he did not care at all. "I heard it in here," Mira said, pressing one flat palm to the center of her sternum. "Like something knocking? Like something that had been very patient for a very long time, finally giving up on being patient." 4 months, Kaylor said. 4 months, she confirmed. "That's how long my wolf has not been quiet." Her breath hitched. "I command the army," he said. "I ended 3 wars. I have sat in a room with 7-pack alphas all trying to kill me politically, and I have never once felt what I have felt for the last 4 months trying to find a woman I saw for 8 seconds in a corridor." He paused. "That should terrify you." "I am aware it should terrify you." It does, Mira said. Good, he said. It terrifies me too. We can be terrified together. He extended one hand, palm up, between them. Or I can go back to the dais and pretend this didn't happen, and you can go back to wherever you've been for 4 months, and we can both continue being miserable indefinitely. He held her gaze. You choose. She looked at his hand. The hall held its breath. And then Neva appeared at his elbow, still clutching her wilting moonflowers, and looked up at Mira with her mismatched eyes and said, with great seriousness, He stopped the whole ceremony for you. I think that counts for something. Mira made a sound that was almost a laugh. It broke something in her face, something that had been held very tight for a very long time, and the tears came back, different this time. And she looked at the child, and then she looked at Kaelor, and then she put her hand in his. The mate bond, which had been screaming for 4 months, went quiet. Not cold, not absent. Quiet in the way a fire went quiet when it had found its hearth. Steady and deep and finally settled. His wolf pressed its nose to the inside of his chest and sighed. Her name was Mira Solwyn. She was 26 years old. She was a healer, common blood healing magic, the golden kind that showed in her palms when she worked, the kind that was technically legal but practically dangerous because too many wolves still believed it was unnatural, something to be viewed with suspicion at best and outright hostility at worst. She had been working as a village healer in Thornic for 3 years. She had been in the capital for this ceremony only because her employer's brother-in-law ran a serving house that had been contracted for the event. She had not wanted to come. She had argued against it. She had lost the argument because she hadn't been able to explain why without telling the truth, and the truth was the kind of thing that sounded mad to anyone who didn't have a wolf, and Mira was not a wolf. She was, as it turned out, something else entirely. Kaelor didn't know that yet. He learned it slowly, the way he was learning everything about her. In pieces. Each one handed over with the careful deliberateness of someone who had learned not to trust that anything would be received gently. That first night, he had asked her to stay in the palace, not in the way he'd asked things of people before, not as an instruction delivered as a fact, not as a command softened with courtesy. He had asked her in the way he had spoken to her in the hall, directly and with full acknowledgement of what he was asking. I'm not asking you to be anything, he said. I'm asking you not to disappear again. That's all. Tonight. Just tonight. She had stayed. Thessaly, his royal healer, had examined her with the professional briskness that was her primary social mode, and had come back to him with an expression he had never seen on Thessaly's face before, a kind of hushed wonder, carefully contained behind her usual clinical precision. She has healing magic, Thessaly said. I know. And something else, Thessaly said. Something older, it's bound. She paused. Someone bound it. The binding is old enough that she probably doesn't even know it's there. Kaelor had stared at her. Find out what it is, he said. That, said Thessaly, will take some time. It took 3 days before Mira came to him with anything approaching ease. Those 3 days were an exercise in the specific discipline of restraint that his wolf found nearly unendurable. She was in the palace. She was 6 rooms away, then 4 rooms away, then 2 rooms away when she started eating her meals in the small garden rather than her chambers. And each increment of closeness was its own particular refinement of the want that had been building for 4 months. He did not crowd her. He brought her information instead of himself when he could. Sent Brennan with books from the Royal Library about healing practices, about the history of common blood magic, about the 7 packs, because she had told him she was curious about history, and he catalogued it the way he catalogued tactical intelligence, filed and cross-referenced and acted upon. He sent Thessaly with updates about the binding investigation, framed as medical facts rather than anything more personal. He arranged for her to have access to the palace garden, where moonflowers grew in the sections that got no direct sunlight, and healers had been known to find specific herbs they couldn't source in villages. On the third afternoon, he came to the garden himself. She was kneeling beside the old stone herb beds, her hands in the dirt, and she looked up when she heard him, and she did not look surprised. The wariness was still there, present in the slight lift of her chin, the way her hands stilled, but it was thinner than it had been. "You've been very careful," she said. "Yes." "Why?" He sat on the stone bench at the garden's edge, near the ancient oak that had watched over Valdoria for generations. "Because I have spent my entire life learning to be dangerous," he said. "It is the only thing I have been consistently required to be. I am not certain I know how to be anything else." He looked at her. "You told me you know what this costs people who don't have power in it. I am trying to change the terms of that." She was quiet for a moment. Her hands went back to the dirt. "What do you want from me?" she said, not hostile, genuinely asking. "I don't know yet," he said, which was the truest thing he had said out loud in a long time. "I know what my wolf wants. I know what the bond wants. I know those things with a certainty that would be convenient if certainty were the same as rightness." He paused. "I want to know what you want. That seems like the necessary first step." She sat back on her heels and looked at him. "No one has ever asked me that," she said. "I'm aware that's not a recommendation," he said. She almost smiled. He stored it. "I want—" She stopped. Tried again. "I have been small for a very long time. Not in size, in scope. I have been a person who took up as little space as possible because taking up space attracted attention, and attention was dangerous. I have been a very small person living in a very small life and telling myself it was enough." Her voice was level, factual, the way he said things when he was most vulnerable. "I want to stop being small. I don't know what that looks like, but I don't want to be invisible anymore." Kaelor listened. "Then you won't be," he said. "You can't just decide that," she said. "I am the Alpha King of Valdoria," he said. "I can decide quite a lot." She did smile then, briefly, reluctantly, and it moved through him like heat through metal, slow and total. Neva reappeared on the fourth day. Kaelor found her in the corridor outside the royal library, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, eating a small roll with the focused application of someone who takes bread seriously. She had acquired a new braid since the ceremony, this one slightly better constructed, and she was wearing the same blue dress, still pinned at the shoulder. He stopped. "How did you get back in?" he said. "My mama is working in the kitchens," Neva said. "There was a contract. 3 weeks." She looked up at him with her mismatched eyes. "Is the lady all right? Did you ask her why she was crying?" "Yes." "What did she say?" Kaelor considered the question. "She said she was crying because something she had been trying very hard not to want had found her anyway." Neva considered this. "Mama says that happens sometimes, with the important things." She tore a piece of her roll. "I like her. She let me sit with her in the garden yesterday, and she showed me which plants are for healing and which ones are poisonous. She knows a lot of things." "She does," Kaelor agreed. She was sad when she talked about where she comes from. Neva said. But the quiet kind of sad. The kind Mama gets sometimes? She held up the remnant of her roll, examining it critically. She smiles more when you're nearby. I noticed. He was quiet for a moment. You notice a great deal, he said. Mama says I have good eyes, Neva said, for seeing the real things. She looked up at him again, direct and calm. You're different too, when she's close. You stop looking like something that's about to bite someone. Kaylor absorbed this. That is the most accurate assessment of my public demeanor I have ever heard, he said. Neva smiled, wide and uncomplicated, and went back to her bread. Thessaly came to him on the 6th day. She sat across from him in the council chamber and folded her hands on the table and looked at him with the particular expression she used when delivering information she suspected he was not going to enjoy, the expression she had been using, over the course of his reign, with increasing frequency. The binding on her power, Thessaly said, was placed before her birth. Kaylor waited. The signature is old, very old, and it matches a bloodline record I found in the palace archives, specifically in the records section no one has accessed for 40 years. She paused. House Solwyn was not always a common bloodline. What were they? Thessaly placed a page on the table between them. It was old, the edges worn, the ink faded to pale brown. A genealogy chart. She put her finger on a name near the bottom. Moon-touched, she said. Not common blood healing magic. The other kind. The old kind. The kind that comes from blood consecrated by the moon goddess herself, 3 generations back, through a line the royal records marked as extinct. She looked at him. Mira Solwyn is not extinct. The room was very quiet. The binding was placed to protect her, Thessaly continued. Someone knew what she was and knew that it would make her a target if the wrong people found out. The binding was meant to suppress it until she was... She paused, searching her words carefully. Until she was anchored. The binding releases gradually as the mate bond strengthens. She doesn't know, Kaylor said. She knows she has healing magic, Thessaly said. She doesn't know what's underneath it. Kaylor stood. He walked to the window. Outside, the palace garden was gold with late afternoon light, and he could see her if he looked. A small figure near the herb beds, working, her hands steady, her head bent. When do I tell her? He said. Before the power starts manifesting on its own, Thessaly said. Which will happen. The bond is progressing faster than I've seen. She'll start noticing things, hearing things, smelling emotions. It will be easier if she knows why. He turned from the window. Arrange a time. She'll need to hear it from you, Thessaly said. Not from me. He looked at her. She trusts you, Thessaly said simply. She does not trust things that come from the institutional machinery of this palace. She trusts you specifically, which is frankly remarkable given the circumstances, and I would advise you not to waste it. He told her that evening. They were in the garden, both of them, after the day's formal work had released him from the demands of council sessions and border dispatches, and the relentless machinery of running a kingdom that never quite stopped wanting things from him. The moon was beginning to rise. Moonflowers were opening along the stone walls, white in the growing dark. He told her everything Thessaly had told him, and he told her directly, without softening it or arranging it strategically, because he had decided somewhere in the last 6 days that the only currency he had that she would actually value was honesty, and he was not going to squander it. She sat very still through all of it. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Moon-touched, she said. Yes. My mother never told me. She may not have known the full extent of it. The binding would have suppressed the clearest signs. Another silence. She was looking at her hands, the hands that had been healing people for 3 years with golden light she had always thought was common, manageable, hers. "Is it dangerous?" she said. "The awakening can be," he said. "If it happens too fast, or without—" He paused. "Without an anchor." She looked up. "You," she said. "That's what Thessaly believes." "And what do you believe?" He considered the honesty question again and chose it, as he had been choosing it all week. "I believe that when you put your hand in mine in the great hall, my wolf stopped trying to tear its way out of my chest for the first time in 4 months. I believe that constitutes some form of anchoring." He held her gaze. "I believe I am not a neutral source on this matter." She exhaled slowly. "No," she said, "you're not." "Mira." She looked at him. "You said you wanted to stop being small," he said. "What is underneath that binding is not small. It is the opposite of small. It is vast, and it is old, and it is yours, and whatever you decide to do with it, I would like to be present for." Her eyes held his for a long moment, and he watched something shift in them. Not the fracturing grief of the ceremony hall, not the guarded calculation of the first 3 days. Something quieter, something that had been waiting behind everything else, all along. "Neva told me you stopped a whole ceremony for me," she said. "I did. You walked off the dais in front of 500 wolves." "Yes. That was—" She stopped. "That was not a small thing." "No," he agreed. "It wasn't." She reached out and touched the back of his hand, not taking it, not the full, claiming gesture of the ceremony hall, just a fingertip resting at his knuckle, light as a moth's wing. The bond hummed between them, low and resonant, like a bell being struck inside her chest. She felt it. He watched her feel it, watched the slight widening of her eyes, the breath that caught and then released slowly. "Oh," she said softly. "Yes," he said. "It feels like—" She searched for words. "Like something I've been carrying for a very long time just set itself down." "Yes," he said again, because he had been carrying it too. The weight of 4 months of not knowing, and it was setting itself down now. Here, in the garden, at the edge of a moonflower bed, with the night rising around them, and a small child somewhere in the palace kitchens, who had, with the perfect unfiltered clarity of someone who hadn't yet learned to look away from obvious things, pointed him in the right direction. The council found out on the 8th day. To be precise, the council had known since the ceremony. 500 wolves had witnessed him walk off the dais and across the hall to a woman in a gray dress. But it took Lord Aldrich Thorne 8 days to crystallize his objections into formal language and present them at the emergency council session that Kaelor had been expecting since approximately the moment he stepped off the dais. Thorne's lip did its curling thing. His voice did its dripping, with barely concealed satisfaction thing. He laid out his objections in the order of their most political inconvenience: the unknown bloodline, the common blood magic, the lack of any formal political alliance, the disruption to the Autumn Accord renewal ceremony, the lack of precedent, the question of the 7 Pack's acceptance of a mate who was not wolf-born. Kaelor let him finish. Then he said, "She is moon-touched." The council chamber went very quiet. "House Solwyn," Kaelor said. 3 generations back. Blood consecrated directly. I have the archive records." He nodded, and Brennan placed the documents on the table. "The common blood healing magic is real, and it is hers, and it is legal under current compact law. What is beneath it is older than this palace, older than the Iron Throne, and it is awakening." He looked around the table. I would suggest that the Council review its position on opposition before the awakening completes, because moon-touched power at full expression is not something I would recommend being on the wrong side of. Thorn stared at the documents. This is unprecedented, said the Alpha of the Northern Pack, which was his way of saying he had no objection but could not admit it. Many things are, Kaelor agreed, with the absolute patience of a man who had won many rooms simply by refusing to match the energy in them. The moon goddess chooses the mate bond without consulting political calendars. I have found this consistently inconvenient. I recommend we all adapt. There was a long silence. Then the oldest council member, who had served 3 generations of Alpha Kings and had seen a great deal, picked up one of the archive documents and studied it and set it down and said, Moon-touched hasn't walked in this kingdom in 600 years. I know, Kaelor said. The old records say moon-touched heal what can't be healed, she said. Not wounds, not illness, the fractures, the things broken at the root. I know. She looked at him with eyes that had seen everything and had decided somewhere along the way to find most of it interesting. Then perhaps, she said, we should be welcoming her rather than interrogating her bloodline. Thorn's lip did the curling thing one more time, but smaller this time, already retreating. Brennan cleared his throat in the doorway, which was his way of indicating that all necessary communication had occurred, and any further discussion would be structural redundancy. Dismissed, Kaelor said. Neva found Mira the morning after the council session. They were in the garden again, Mira with her hands in the herb beds, and Neva came around the corner of the stone wall eating a piece of preserved fruit with the same serious application she brought to all food, and sat down cross-legged in the grass, a respectful distance from the herb beds, and watched Mira work. Mira looked up. Good morning. Good morning, Neva said. My mama says the big wolves in the fancy robes had a meeting about you. They did. Are you in trouble? No, Mira said. I don't think so. Neva ate her fruit. Mama says sometimes people make trouble for things they don't understand. She says that's why it's important to learn about things before you decide how you feel about them. Your mama sounds very wise, Mira said. She is, Neva agreed. She says the same thing about the big wolf king. She says he was very scary before, but now he's less scary. She tilted her head. She thinks it's because of you. Mira sat back on her heels and looked at the child. Neva, she said. Can I ask you something? Yes. That day at the ceremony, when you came and pulled his sleeve, were you looking for him specifically, or were you just wandering? Neva considered this with the seriousness she gave most questions. I was wandering, she said. And then I smelled it. The same smell from both of you, like the same something going in 2 different directions. She frowned, assembling the memory. Mama said once that wolves find their mates by smell. She said it's the most honest thing about them, that their nose always knows before their brain does. She looked at Mira. You smelled like his wolf, and you were crying. And he was standing on the stage not listening to the man talking. So I thought maybe he needed to know. Mira was quiet. Thank you, she said. You're welcome, Neva said, politely and immediately, as if this were an ordinary courtesy. Neva, Mira said, is your mother? Does she have family in the city? People to look after you both? Something moved through the child's face, small and quick and controlled, in the way children's faces controlled things when they had learned early that some subjects were complicated. Mama has her work, she said. And me. A pause. That's enough. Mama says we're enough for each other. Mira looked at the child for a moment. Then she looked up, across the garden, and Kaler was standing at the garden entrance, watching, as he sometimes did, the way he stood in most places. Very still, very there, not attempting to be anything other than what he was. She held his gaze. Something passed between them, through the bond that was deepening every day. Not words, not even precisely feelings, but a kind of knowing. A shared attention turned in the same direction, a shared noticing of the same thing. He gave a single, small nod. She turned back to Neva. Would you and your mother like to take your meals here while she's working the contract? In the garden? Or the small hall off the kitchen? Not the formal dining. Just here. Neva's mismatched eyes went very wide. Can I come to the garden and help with the plants? She said. If you want to. I want to, Neva said, with such immediate certainty that Mira smiled, full and real and without any of the usual tightness around the edges. Kaler, across the garden, watched her smile. He stored it, the way he had been storing all of them, cataloging each one with the thoroughness he gave to things that mattered. The power started coming in on the 11th day. Not dramatically, not the way the old stories described. No sudden silver light, no earth-shaking recognition, no single moment of catastrophic awakening. Mira had been expecting something enormous, and it came in whispers instead, which was almost more frightening. She started smelling things she hadn't been able to smell before. Not objects, not food or flowers, or the specific mineral quality of old stone. She started smelling emotions. She was in the small hall with Kaler reviewing the reports about a boundary dispute between two packed territories, sitting across the table from him with documents spread between them, and she felt something shift in her nose. Not a physical sensation, but an expansion, like a window opening. And she could smell that he was tired, bone-tired, the kind of tired that had nothing to do with sleep, and she could smell that underneath the tiredness, there was something that was, very quietly, content. She sat very still. He looked up. What's wrong? Nothing, she said. Then, more honestly, something. She paused. I can smell your emotions. He set his pen down. Thessaly said this would happen, he said. I know. She was still very still. You're tired, and underneath it you're... She stopped, because the thing she was smelling underneath his tiredness was private, was the kind of thing she was not certain she had the right to name out loud. Content, he said, for her. She looked at him. Yes, he said. It appears that knowing where you are, with some regularity, has had a significant impact on my baseline emotional state. My wolf finds this only logical. A pause. I have been assured by Brennan that I am, quote, considerably less insufferable to work with. She breathed out, almost laughed. Brennan told me that too, she said. Brennan talks more than a first beta is traditionally required to? Kaler said. He's worried about you, Mira said. It comes through as a kind of warm gray, the worrying, like hearth smoke. Kaler looked at her with something moving through his face that she didn't have a name for yet. Something complicated and layered, and underneath all of it, careful. Careful the way he was careful with her, as if she were something he was holding very deliberately, with full attention, not because she was fragile, but because she mattered. Mira, he said. I want to tell you something. All right. I have been, in the 11 days since the ceremony, attempting to demonstrate through consistent action that I understand the difference between wanting someone and respecting their right to want something back on their own terms. He held her gaze. I want you to know that this is not a limited engagement That I am not, he paused, that I am in this completely, whatever form it takes, whatever pace it requires. I am not going anywhere. The bond hummed. She felt it in her sternum, that low bell-strike resonance, and she felt something else beneath it. The very first flickering of the moon-touched power, not the healing gold she knew. Something older, something silver and vast and deep as a winter sky, pressing gently against the inside of her chest, like a tide testing the shore. I know, she said. I can feel it, what you feel. She pressed her hand to her own sternum. In here. Is it? He stopped. Steady, she said softly. It's very steady. Something in his face released. Good, he said, very quietly, and then quieter still. Good. On the 14th day, Neva's mother's contract ended. Mira found out from Neva, who told her with the direct, unornamented honesty that characterized all of her communications, standing in the garden that morning, handing Mira a bundle of herbs they had gathered together with careful small fingers. Mama says we leave tomorrow, Neva said. Mira took the herbs. Do you have to? She said. Neva looked at her with her mismatched eyes. Mama says we cannot stay unless there is work. Mira was quiet. She thought about what she had smelled off Neva's mother when they had met, 3 days into the garden meals, over a simple dinner with bread and stewed vegetables and a small fire in the courtyard brazier. The woman had dark hair like Neva's, going gray at the temples, and hands that were healers' hands, calloused at the same points Mira's were, and the smell that came off her had been the particular complex grief of someone who has been surviving in the narrow margin between enough and not enough for so long that they had stopped noticing the narrowness. She had smelled like someone who needed the moon-touched kind of healing that had nothing to do with wounds or illness. She went to Kaylor. He was in the council antechamber with Brennan and 3 dispatches that needed responses before midday. And when she came through the door, he looked up with the immediate full attention that she was still, 14 days in, not entirely accustomed to. The way he oriented toward her, complete and unambiguous, the way everything else in the room became slightly less important. She told him about Neva's mother, about the contract ending, about what she had smelled. He listened. What do you need? He said when she finished. I don't know if I have the right to ask. What do you need? He said again, the same way, simple and direct. She looked at him. There's a post in the Palace Healer Suite, she said. An assistant position. Thessaly mentioned it. It's yours if she wants it, he said. She'll need quarters, both of them. Something small and... Brennan, Kaylor said. Brennan, who had been pretending to review a dispatch, looked up with the expression of a man who had been quietly ready for this conversation for several days. There are 3 rooms in the East Wing currently unoccupied, he said. 2 of them overlook the garden. I took the liberty of noting they were available in case the matter came up. Mira looked at Brennan. He is considerably less insufferable to work with, Brennan confirmed. Mira pressed her lips together. Thank you, she said. The child will require supervision in the garden, Brennan added, with the careful diplomatic phrasing of a man who had strong feelings about herb beds being excavated. She is enthusiastic. She can help me, Mira said. I'll teach her properly. Kaylor was watching her, that steady, careful attention, and through the bond she felt what was in him. Still that bedrock steadiness, still the deep tide of content that she was only beginning to understand, was permanent, was foundational, was what he was now, and underneath it, a warmth that had been growing since the first day in the garden and was doing something to the walls she had spent a very long time building. Mira, he said. Yes. You said you wanted to stop being small? Yes. You have been, in 14 days, not small at all, he said, in case that is useful information. She felt it then, the rising of tears, but different from the tears at the ceremony. Not grief, not the quiet, devastating hopelessness of something you were trying very hard not to want. Something else. Something that felt, remarkably and terrifyingly, like gratitude and rightness, and the very specific texture of a door opening. I should go tell Neva, she said. Yes, he said. She was almost through the door when she stopped. Kaelor, she said. He looked at her. She searched for the word. I am glad it was you. She paused. That the moon chose. I am glad it was you specifically. Something moved through his face. All the layers he kept controlled. The power and the restraint and the 1,000 years of bloodline weight and the exhaustion of being the most powerful wolf in 7 packs. And underneath it, simple as light through water, something that was just him. So am I, he said. 3 months later, in the ceremony hall, smaller, this time, private, just the 7-pack leaders and Thessaly and Brennan and Neva, who had demanded to attend and had been given a formal role involving the moonflowers and had taken this responsibility with the gravity of someone entrusted with a matter of state. Mira Solwyn stood before the Alpha King of Valdoria and made vows. They were not political vows, not the formal alliance language of treaty marriages and bloodline consolidation. Thessaly had offered to write the traditional text, and Mira had said gently that she would like to write her own, and Kaelor had said he would like to write his own as well, and Brennan had cleared his throat with the particular frequency that indicated he found this development very satisfying. Mira's vows were short. I have been invisible for a long time, she said. I have been small and careful and invisible, and I convinced myself that was safety. But what it was, mostly, was lonely. She looked at him. I was afraid of this, of the bond, of what it would ask of me, of what it would cost. A pause. It has not cost what I feared. It has asked what I feared, which is different. It has asked me to be seen, to be known, to take up the space that was always mine, to stop running from the things that find me anyway. She held his gaze. I am done running. I choose to be here, not because the bond demands it, because I want to be here, with you. Every version of this. The council sessions and the border disputes, and the 3,000 dispatches, and the mornings in the garden, and the child braiding flowers into things that do not belong to her. Neva, holding her moonflowers with great dignity, looked up and said, I put them back. Several people did not laugh, very carefully. Every version of this, Mira said again. I am choosing it. Kaelor's vows were also short. I have commanded armies, he said. I have held a kingdom by force of will and bloodline, and the particular terror I inspire in people who disagree with me politically. I have been, by most credible accounts, extraordinarily difficult to know. He paused. You knew me anyway. You smelled through it, literally. You chose to put your hand in mine in a room full of 500 wolves who were waiting to see what I would do. And you did it because a 5-year-old with mismatched eyes told you it was the right thing to do. A pause. I am deeply grateful for that 5-year-old. He looked at her. I promise you this. I will not go anywhere. I will show up. Every day I will show up and I will learn. And when I get it wrong, which I will ask you to tell me, and I will listen. He held her gaze. You are not invisible. You have not been invisible for a single moment since you walked past that door. You are the clearest thing I have ever seen. The moon touched power, which had been rising slowly for 3 months, rising and settling and rising again with the deepening of the bond, pressed warm and silver against the inside of Mira's chest. She let it. It rose through her like a tide coming in, silver gold, vast and old and gentle, and around the edges of the small ceremony hall, the moon flowers on the stone ledges opened all at once, every single one of them, though it was morning and they were night-blooming flowers, and this was not how flowers worked. Neva looked at the flowers, looked at Mira, looked at the flowers again. "That," she said with tremendous satisfaction, "is very good." Brennan made the sound he made when something moved him, and he would not admit it. Calor, Alpha King of Valdoria, who had not smiled in public at a ceremony in 11 years of reign, smiled. And Mira Solwyn, who had spent a very long time being invisible, stood in the silver light of her own making, and was not small at all. Outside, above the palace, a wolf howled at the late morning sky. And it was not a howl of warning, or of mourning, or of the long, lonely searching that had echoed through Valdoria's borders for 4 months. It was just joy, simple, uncomplicated, finally, joy.